We were taught that the Nazis rose from nothing. That hatred alone was enough to rebuild a shattered nation into the most dangerous war machine in human history. That and Oppos, a clean story. Clean, simple, and carefully incomplete. Because hatred doesn't end Oppos, manufacture tanks. Ideology doesn't end Oppos, refine jet fuel. Fanaticism doesn't end Oppos, run a death camp and Oppos, logistics. You need steel. You need oil. You need billions of dollars. And Germany, in 1933, had none of those things. So where did it come from? Not Berlin. Wall Street. World War I left Germany on its knees. The Treaty of Versailles buried them under reparations they could never repay. Hyperinflation turned life savings into paper. Unemployment hit 30%. People burned currency for heat because it was cheaper than firewood. The Reichsmark was worthless. The nation was humiliated. The ground was perfect for what was coming. And into that wreckage, American banks arrived. Not with compassion, with spreadsheets. In 1924, J.P. Morgan, Chase National Bank, and a consortium of American lenders restructured Germany and Oppos' entire debt under the Dawes Plan. They issued bonds, extended credit, placed American representatives inside the German economic system to oversee it directly. Between 1924 and 1931, $475 million flowed from the United States into Germany. $8 billion in today and Oppos' money. Not charity. Alone. With interest. With influence. With strings that reached all the way back to Manhattan. When Hitler seized power in 1933, he didn't end Oppos' build from rubble. He inherited a financial architecture that Wall Street had already designed, funded, and furnished. And Wall Street didn't end Oppos' walk away when the swastika went up. They stayed. Quietly. Profitably. Ask yourself the question no textbook ever does. How did the Luftwaffe fly? Germany had no oil. Not one significant field. No colonies. No pipeline to the Middle East. A landlocked nation with the ambition to conquer a continent, and nothing to put in the tank. The answer is a private agreement made far from the front lines. Standard Oil, the Rockefeller Empire, and IG Farben, Germany and Oppos' chemical giant, entered a joint venture. They shared patents, exchanged technology, and at the center of it all, hydrogenation, the process that converts coal into synthetic liquid fuel. That one technology kept the entire German war machine alive. Without it, German engines run dry within 6 months of the opening shot. Standard Oil knew what they were feeding. They had men inside Germany. They read the reports. They understood the regime. And they kept the partnership running. After the invasion of Poland, after the fall of France, after war was formally declared, the company that became Exxon gave Adolf Hitler the fuel to sustain his war. Fill up your tank and think about that. The Holocaust was not only a crime. It was an operation. Millions of people had to be identified, categorized, tracked, transported, processed, accounted for. An undertaking of that scale doesn't end Oppos' run on hatred alone. It runs on information. IBM provided the information. They didn't end Oppos' simply sell machines to Germany. They engineered custom punch card systems specifically designed for racial classification and population tracking. Every major concentration camp had IBM equipment running on site, processing prisoner numbers, transport schedules, labor rosters, death tallies. IBM and Oppos' German subsidiary, Die Hamag, kept the machines maintained. Technicians were dispatched. Updates were delivered. Parts were shipped across a war. And back in New York, IBM collected royalties. On every card punched. On every human being processed. They did not pull the trigger. They made the killing legible, systematic, scalable, modern. After the war, no prosecution, no criminal trial, no public reckoning. IBM is still one of the most powerful technology companies on Earth. Henry Ford did not hide his worldview. He published a newspaper dedicated to anti-Semitic propaganda. He distributed fabricated conspiracy texts as though they were fact. He gave the Nazi movement ideological ammunition before it even had a country to run. Hitler kept Ford and Oppos' portrait on his desk, called him an inspiration, awarded him Germany and Oppos' highest civilian honor for a foreigner. When the war began, Ford and Oppos' German factories didn't end Oppos' pause. They accelerated. Trucks for the Wehrmacht. engines for the occupation. Built by concentration camp prisoners working without wages, without rights, without futures. After Pearl Harbor, after American boys began dying on European soil, Fort Huerco was officially designated a critical military asset by the Nazi government. And when it was over, Ford and Appos' company filed a compensation claim against the United States government, demanding that American taxpayers reimburse them for Allied bombs that had damaged factories building vehicles for the enemy. They filed that claim without irony, without shame. General Motors tells the same story. Their German subsidiary, Opel, produced half of all German military trucks, 1/3 of all armored vehicles. The Blitzkrieg, the campaign that erased Poland in weeks, folded France in months, and drove to the edge of Moscow, moved on General Motors' wheels. After the war, GM sued Washington for $33 million in war damages. They won. The check was written. Paris, 1940, the Germans have arrived. Chase National Bank and Appos' branch in the occupied city faced a decision. They chose to stay open. More than that, they froze the accounts of Jewish customers, assisted Nazi administrators in liquidating assets, helped process the financial dispossession of families who were already being loaded onto trains. That branch operated until 1944, 3 full years after the United States entered the war. 3 years of American soldiers dying to liberate a continent, while an American bank helped the occupiers strip it clean. Documents declassified in the 1990s removed any possibility of doubt. Executives were informed. Reports came in. Decisions were made at the board level. They kept the branch open because it generated revenue. That bank is today J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest financial institution in the United States. Nuremberg held trials. Some German industrialists were convicted. I.G. Farben, Krupp, a handful of names for the history books. The American companies were protected. Washington needed them. The Marshall Plan required industrial capacity. The Cold War demanded manufacturing. The economy depended on the very corporations that had just spent a decade arming the enemy. So the files were classified. The contracts were sealed. The cases were buried. It took 50 years. Sustained litigation by Holocaust survivors. Decades of archival research, before the full picture finally began to surface. In 2000, a compensation fund for slave laborers was established, $5 billion, sourced from German industry. Ford and General Motors together contributed $20 million, against the billions they had earned, against the lives consumed in factories they had built and staffed with the enslaved. IBM denied knowledge until the 2000s, 60 years after the machinery stopped running. Settled privately. No admission of wrongdoing. No public apology. Most executives died wealthy, surrounded by family, honored by their industries. Most companies suffered nothing beyond the inconvenience of a settlement check. This is not a conspiracy theory. It exists in congressional records, in declassified archives, in legal depositions and corporate memoranda that sat in filing cabinets for half a century before anyone was allowed to read them. At ISN and Appos, T-Tot. Not because the evidence is thin, but because the companies involved never disappeared. They grew. They lobbied. They endowed universities and named buildings after their founders and shaped, quietly and continuously, what version of the past we are permitted to remember. The lesson here is not that these men were monsters. Monsters would be easier. The lesson is that they were rational, calculating. They ran the numbers, weighed the exposure, and determined that the profit justified the partnership. And they were right, at least for themselves. No sell, no trial, no consequence worth the name. That calculus did not die in 1945. It simply became more sophisticated, more practiced, better dressed. The Nazi regime needed the world and Appos' cooperation to do what it did. And the world, quietly, efficiently, profitably, cooperated.